I never imagined that one Thanksgiving dinner could change the entire way I saw my family, my faith, and even myself. But that's exactly what happened last year in my parents' quiet home in Layton, Utah, where everything always looked safe, predictable, and deeply Mormon in the way I had grown up understanding the world. That evening, the house smelled like turkey and cinnamon rolls. The BYU football game played softly on the living room TV, and everyone acted as if nothing in our world had ever shaken us. But my grandmother's silence had been shaking for years. It just took that moment for the cracks to finally widen. My grandmother, Eleanor, was 88 and shrinking a little more each year. Her voice had softened, her hands trembled more than she liked to admit, but her eyes still had that sharp clarity that made me nervous as a child. She was what people in our ward called a true pioneer descendant, the kind of woman who still folded temple linens with reverence and didn't approve of people whispering about so-called church controversies. For most of my life, she avoided every uncomfortable subject, especially anything involving church history. Whenever someone asked about our ancestors, she gently smiled and said, "They were good people." Leave it at that. But that Thanksgiving, I saw something in her face that didn't match her usual calm. She looked haunted. Or maybe just tired of pretending. At first I thought it was simply age, or the noise, or maybe the cold weather affecting her arthritis again. But I kept catching her watching everyone with a distant expression, almost like she wasn't sitting with us but replaying something far older, something she had never allowed herself to speak aloud. After dinner, we all sat in the living room, passing pumpkin pie around. My father bragged about my brother's new internship. My mother tried to steer the conversation to spiritual gratitude. And my husband, Daniel, squeezed my knee under the blanket, something he did whenever he sensed my anxiety rising in family gatherings like these. I had been going through my own quiet faith crisis for years, but no one in the room knew that except Daniel. I still attended church, still wore the smile, still fulfilled the calling they gave me in Relief Society, even though every Sunday felt heavier than the one before. Then my younger sister, who had just returned from her mission in Tennessee, pulled up our family tree on Family Search. She was excited, glowing the way only recently returned missionaries do, talking about discovering our heritage and connecting with ancestors. She turned her phone to my grandmother and said, "Look, Grandma, someone added photos of your grandparents. Isn't that amazing?" That was the moment everything changed. My grandmother's fork slipped from her hand and hit the plate with a soft clink. She didn't react at first. She just stared at the image on the screen as if it were a ghost resurrected from a place she had sealed away long ago. Her lips tightened, her chest rose slowly, and her eyes filled not with tears, but with something deeper. Something like dread. My mother noticed immediately. "Mom, are you okay?" But my grandmother didn't answer. She looked around the room, as if checking to see if everyone was really there, listening, seeing her. Then she said something I never expected to hear from her, not in a million years. "I need to tell the truth," she whispered. "All of it. Before I die." The room froze. Even the youngest kids, who had been playing with Legos nearby, seemed to sense something had shifted. My father gently placed his dessert plate down. "Mom, you don't have to do this right now. It's Thanksgiving. We can talk another time." She shook her head. "No. There's no other time left. You've all lived your lives believing a version of our family's past that isn't real. And I can't carry the weight of the silence anymore." I felt a cold wave move through my body. My breath caught in my throat. Daniel took my hand, and for the first time all evening, I was grateful he was there. Because I knew instinctively that whatever she was about to say would touch the very core of the questions I had been afraid to ask myself. My grandmother took a deep breath, her frail chest rising slowly, and said, "It's about polygamy, our polygamy. The part the church doesn't talk about anymore. The part our family hid," my dad quickly interjected, almost reflexively. Just to be clear, the church hasn't practiced polygamy in over a century. The manifesto ended it in 1890, and new plural marriages became grounds for excommunication in 1904. That's all long over. I know that, she said sharply. This isn't about the church today. This is about us. About what happened in our family. And what it did to the women who came before me. The room went silent again. I felt something inside me collapse, the same sense of disorientation I've been fighting for years. I didn't know why the subject hit me so deeply, but hearing her say the word felt like opening a door that had been locked my entire life. She folded her shaking hands in her lap and looked at all of us, her children, grandchildren, spouses, great-grandchildren. And then, in a voice filled with both strength and fragility, she said, "My grandmother was a plural wife." My heart dropped. Not because it was shocking historically, it wasn't. Thousands of Latter-day Saint families had polygamy in their lineage. What shocked me was the realization that our entire family had been built on a deliberate silence I never knew existed. That my grandmother had carried this truth alone for decades. That the emotional distance I always felt in her wasn't personal, it was inherited. And that, somehow, this truth was connected to the confusion and heaviness I had been carrying inside myself. She continued speaking, but her words were beginning to blur as my mind tried to absorb the weight of what she had just revealed. That was the moment everything began to unravel. My grandmother's voice trembled as she continued, but there was a resolve in her eyes that told me she wasn't going to hold anything back this time. I had never seen her like that, so vulnerable, yet so determined. It felt like sitting in a room where the air had suddenly thickened, like every word she spoke carried the weight of an entire century pressing through her frail body. She was the second wife, Grandma said softly, 18 years old. Younger than all of you sitting here. The image struck me hard. A girl barely more than a child, stepping into a life she hadn't chosen, believing it was God's will. I felt my throat tighten. I imagined myself at 18, naive, hopeful, terrified of disappointing anyone. How could a girl that young carry such a burden? And yet, she did. My ancestor did. She lived in a small home behind the main house, Grandma continued. Not a shack, but nothing like what the first wife had. My great-grandfather built it himself, and people praised him for being fair and kind. They said he did it to keep peace, but the truth is, they were never equals. Not in the eyes of the community. And certainly not in a home. Her hands shook more noticeably now, and my mother reached for them again, but Grandma pulled her hands back gently, needing the space to speak. The first wife, she said, was a strong woman. She didn't want to share her husband. No one ever did, not really. But she believed it was a commandment. She believed obedience mattered more than her own heart. And so she accepted the arrangement, even though it caused deep pain. No one moved. No one breathed. The silence was so complete that I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Grandma swallowed hard. The two wives were taught to treat each other like sisters. That was the ideal, but in reality they were rivals, bound by faith, but separated by resentment. The first wife had already given him 6 children. The second was barely a woman yet. And when she gave birth to her first child, the jealousy became unbearable. She paused, blinking back tears. My grandmother used to whisper these stories to my mother late at night, afraid neighbors might overhear. She said the house was full of unspoken tension, like everyone walked around with bruises no one could see. I felt a shiver travel down my spine. It reminded me of how our own family avoided emotions, avoided conflict, avoided truth, smiling through everything like it was a religious mandate. Grandma took a breath. During family gatherings, the children were told never to mention that there were 2 mothers. We're one family, they said, but that wasn't true. The first wife's children were always the legitimate ones, the ones people praised. The second wife's children were tolerated. Her voice cracked on that word. My mother, stunned, finally whispered, "Mom, why didn't we ever hear this? Why hide it?" Grandma looked at her with an exhaustion that felt like it had been building for decades. "Because my mother was ashamed. Because her mother was ashamed. Because the church was trying to distance itself from that history, and families like ours didn't want to be judged or misunderstood. Because good Mormon people believed silence was safer than honesty." Her gaze fell to her lap. "I believe that too." Hearing her say that broke something in me. I hadn't realized how much of my own emotional life had been shaped by silence, not just church silence but family silence. Generational silence. A trained instinct to avoid anything that could cause discomfort. Daniel slid his arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, grateful for a moment of grounding. My mind was unraveling in a way that was both painful and strangely clarifying. Grandma continued, her voice steadier now, as if the act of speaking had given her strength. "When polygamy ended, officially the church told families to move forward and live monogamy. But for the women who had already lived the pain, ending the practice didn't erase what had happened. It didn't heal wounds. It didn't undo the years of feeling lesser or hidden." She closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again they glistened. "And after that, after the second manifesto in 1904, people became terrified of being associated with polygamy, scared of being excommunicated, scared of being judged as rebellious or fringe. So families like ours were told to bury it. Not out of malice, but out of fear." My father exhaled slowly, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, those were different times. The church was trying to stay alive. Everything was changing." "I know that," she said gently. "I'm not blaming the church. I'm talking about what silence does. About what hiding does." Her words felt like they were aimed directly at me. At the version of me who has spent years pretending I was fine, pretending I didn't feel the fractures in my testimony, pretending my doubts were temporary. Grandma's confession was beginning to feel like more than a family story, more like a mirror reflecting the emotional inheritance we all carried. She went on. "My mother was raised in that atmosphere where loyalty was measured by how little you questioned, where you proved your worthiness through silence. And she passed that on to me. And I passed it on to you, without even meaning to." I blinked hard, overwhelmed by a wave of realization. Of course, this made sense. The fear of asking hard questions. The pressure to act perfect. The instinct to hide anything that didn't fit the narrative. The guilt for simply being human. It wasn't just church culture. It was family culture. It was our culture. My grandmother whispered, "All my life, I believed that if I ignored the pain long enough, it would disappear." But pain doesn't disappear, darling. It just finds a new home in the next generation. Her words hit me so deeply that I had to look away, swallowing down the surge of emotion burning in my throat. My sister sat frozen, eyes wide and wet. My mother covered her mouth. My father stared at the floor, his jaw tight, and I felt something inside me finally click into place, like a puzzle piece I didn't realize had been missing. I understood, in that moment, that my grandmother's confession wasn't just a revelation of the past, it was an explanation of the present, of us, of me. And I also realized that nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same after that night. After that Thanksgiving night, nothing felt normal anymore. Not the house I grew up in, not my own thoughts, not even the way I looked at my grandmother when I visited her the next morning. It felt like the entire foundation of our family had shifted a few inches overnight, subtle enough that the walls were still standing, but deep enough that you could feel the tilt under your feet. I found her sitting in her recliner, wearing a pale blue sweater and holding a mug of herbal tea, like she was trying to warm her hands on something more than heat. She gave me a small smile when I walked in. "I knew you'd come," she said. I sat down beside her. My voice was still shaky. "Grandma, I didn't know. I didn't know any of it." She nodded slowly. Of course you didn't. We made sure you wouldn't. I swallowed. Why me though? Why tell all of us last night? Her eyes softened. Because you're the one who's been carrying the weight without knowing where it came from. I looked away, embarrassed that she had seen through me so clearly. You think I haven't noticed? She continued gently. I've watched you struggle with your faith, with the world, with yourself. I saw that same struggle in my mother. And in her mother before her, something inside me cracked. I feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore. Like I'm pretending in every direction. She placed her hand over mine, her skin cool and thin. Pretending was the only way we knew how to live. But that doesn't mean you have to keep doing the same. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the emotions swirling inside me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. You tell the truth, she said simply. Even when it hurts. Even when people don't want to hear it. But what if it destroys the relationships I care about? She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, one filled with both grief and wisdom. Then they weren't built on truth in the first place. Her words didn't feel harsh. They felt like medicine, bitter, yes, but cleansing in a way I didn't expect. She leaned back in her chair, her voice softer. I spent 90 years believing silence was loyalty. But silence is only a cage, sweetheart. It keeps you inside the version of life someone else wrote for you. Those words echoed inside me long after I left her house. In the days that followed, everything around me seemed different. Church on Sunday felt heavier, the hymns echoing off the chapel walls in a way that made every verse sound like a reminder of things I wasn't sure I believed anymore. My relief, society president pulled me aside to ask if I was doing okay spiritually, and I smiled and said yes because I didn't know how to explain anything without unraveling completely. Daniel and I talked more deeply than we had in years. For the first time, I opened up about the pressure I had felt as a woman in the church, the expectations around motherhood, modesty, submission, perfection, and how hearing Grandma's story made me realize those pressures didn't begin with me. They were inherited, reinforced, passed down not through scripture, but through fear and silence. Daniel listened without judgment. That alone felt like a miracle. One night, I sat alone on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the December air biting at my skin. I remember thinking about patterns, how they repeat through generations unless someone chooses to stop them. I thought about my grandmother's ancestors, about the wives who lived their entire lives trying to swallow their pain for the sake of righteousness, about the men who didn't realize the emotional consequences their choices would have generations later, about my grandmother, raised by a woman who taught her to hide sorrow behind obedience. And I thought about the way I had learned to hide my own doubts, questions, dreams, smiling, because that was easier than disappointing people. As I traced these thoughts, I realized something that shook me. Every emotional wound in our family had a root. Every silence had an origin. Every unspoken rule had a beginning. Nothing happens randomly. Everything follows currents that flow through time, through ancestry, through our behaviors and choices. And if I didn't confront these patterns, I would pass them on to my own children someday without meaning to, without even noticing. The next week, I visited Grandma again. She was weaker this time, her breath shorter, her movements slower. I sat beside her, taking her hand. I've been thinking a lot, I said quietly, about what you told us. About everything, she nodded. I knew you would. I don't want to live in silence anymore. A small smile spread across her face. Then you're already changing things. I hesitated before asking, do you regret not telling the truth earlier? She closed her eyes for a moment. Yes and no. I regret the weight it put on all of us. But I also know I wasn't strong enough back then. Sometimes people only become brave near the end. I squeezed her hand. Thank you for being brave now. Her smile softened. It's your turn next. 3 weeks later, she passed away peacefully in her sleep. The funeral was small, quiet, dignified. The bishop talked about her faithfulness, her service, her loyalty to the gospel. He didn't mention the story she told us. And for a moment, I felt that familiar frustration, like the truth was once again being swept under a rug. But then my mother stood to speak. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling, and said something I will never forget. My mother believed in the truth. Even when it was hard. Even when it was uncomfortable. She taught us that faith isn't about pretending everything was perfect. It's about facing what is real. And in that moment, I felt something shift. Not just in the room, but in our entire family. We were changing. I was changing. That night, after everyone went home, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of cocoa, thinking about everything that had happened. The past. The women who suffered silently. The legacy of secrecy. My grandmother's courage. My own fear. My own awakening. And as I sat there, I understood something with profound clarity. Life is shaped by the truths we resist and the truths we embrace. Every hidden wound has a way of resurfacing. Every silent story eventually demands to be told. Every unresolved pattern repeats until someone has the courage to break it. My grandmother broke it. Now it was my turn to live differently, not out of rebellion, not out of bitterness, but out of honesty. Out of love for the women who came before me. Out of hope for the ones who will come after. And for the first time in my life, I felt something that had always eluded me. I felt free. If this story touched you, I'd love for you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might help someone who feels alone in their own journey. And if you'd like to support more stories like this, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link in the description. But mostly, I hope you leave this video remembering that truth, spoken with love, has the power to heal what generations of silence could not.